This is To the Right House, a new podcast series by the Global Campus of Human Rights. From skepticism to hope, from utopia to empathy, we discuss human rights, riding waves, but also signalling where the light is. This podcast was recorded in Venice, Italy, on the island of Lido, at the Global Campus headquarters.
In the second episode of our podcast series on hope-based human rights, we want to discuss the importance of evidencing hope in human rights work. In the face of the current backlash against human rights, we want to reflect on how to hope for the better and what we can learn from the need to stress achievements in our continuous human rights struggles. In this conversation, I'm honored to be joined by Mary Lawlor, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Welcome, Mary, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so in your remarkable recent report, Success Through Perseverance and Solidarity, 25 Years of Achievements by Human Rights Defenders, you explicitly call for a change in the narrative surrounding human rights defenders from one that focuses on repression and violations to successes and hope. What prompted you to change the narrative?
Well, this year, the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders is 25 years old. So I wanted a way of marking the contribution that human rights defenders make to building civil and just societies around the world. And we had been having all through COVID and even still hearings with human rights defenders from all over the world, 1,200 we've spoken to. And what we started to get them to just put out a one-page questionnaire, because they would come on the Zoom or whatever platform we were using, and they'd expect you to know where exactly they were and what they were doing and everything. And I would be frantically with a map trying to find the town that they were talking about. But so that's why we started, basic questionnaires ahead of hearings with contact details and what they were working on, blah, blah, blah. But one of the questions I wanted, and this goes back a long time, I used to do it in the organization I set up as well, are there any small successes that you are proud of? And we got a wealth of information from those questionnaires. And it started me thinking, that wouldn't it be nice for the 25th anniversary to do a report which shows the contribution that human rights defenders make. So we did a load more consultations before the report, structured conversations with defenders in different regions and different countries. And we have tons more examples that went into the report, but it's just, I just thought it was a way of celebrating them, of making them visible, making them credible, showing the work they do, while at the same time showing the awful risks that they face.
It sounds like it must have been something they really liked, being recognized, but also it helps explain why they do what they do.
Well, the thing about human rights defenders is, what they need most of all is recognition, credibility, and visibility by the international community, by states, by everyone, because that is a form of protection for them. So there are, of course, some human rights defenders who want to work under the radar, but for those who are trying to deliver human rights-based solutions to awful problems, this is what they need. And it's a morale booster for them too, when they see that they are being recognized. So it's always been really important to me and that's why, in my last job, I started a website just to recognize and make visible the work of human rights defenders. So when it came to the report, that's what I was aiming at. I was collating and getting all the information that we had gathered and putting it into some kind of form where, as a way of also trying to show states that they shouldn't be treating them as an enemy. These people are good people, and they really are working in the best interests of ordinary people in their countries. Unfortunately, they are also a threat to corrupt power. So governments and non-state actors and business all attack them. And I always say repression is a measure of effectiveness. If they weren't being effective, they would be allowed to do whatever they do. But it's because they're effective that they're being targeted and attacked. So this was a way of, I suppose, thanking the defenders as well.
I mean, I was really struck by that the defenders are from all over the world, including sort of even wealthy Western countries. And I know you call on in your report and have called on for quite some time, states to celebrate and recognize their own national human rights defenders or local human rights defenders. But of course, that's not, as you said, always forthcoming. Do you think that, there's a sort of internationalization of hope when we call on states to recognize human rights defenders around the world, that, they have hopes for maybe groups which are not in their actual local society, which aren't going to get them votes or, give them an opportunity to have an event or something like that?
Well, I suppose I'm a bit cynical when it comes to the role of states. It's like the Lithuanian ambassador said to me there in Geneva a couple of weeks ago, that everyone loves human rights defenders as long as they're not in their country. And a couple of weeks later, Lithuania brought in an emergency law to allow pushbacks of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. Shocking. Yeah. So when I look at the way states behave towards human rights, of course you have a group of states. We have about 12 states in a contact group who say they will take action once a month. We send them a case. And they say they'll take action on that case, or if it's a draft law that we want to try and improve, they say they will. But every state, as you know better than I do, is driven by their own political and strategic interests, and they're not going to let human rights stand in the way. And if they feel that by raising issues of human rights defenders and human rights is going to interfere with whatever political, strategic, trade deal, whatever it is, they're not going to do it. And what I'm trying to say to states is, states, they don't have thick necks, and they know how to navigate the world. And what I'm trying to say is, you can ask searching questions of oppressive states and advocate for people who are criminalized or have been given long jail sentences or have been physically attacked or assassination attempts or whatever. There's a way of asking and letting it be clear that you do not approve of that, while at the same time trying to pursue your trade deal or your political engagement or whatever it is. Like, it's not one or the other in my book. And the other thing I would say is when it comes to business, so I'm very glad the EU is bringing in this draft directive on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence next year, hopefully the end of next year. Because for the first time, and we managed to get human rights defenders named as a stakeholder, fingers crossed it remains. But for the first time, business are going to have to consult properly with human rights defenders, who, after all, are the people who know best how to mitigate the risks on the ground and actually work to find a solution that both is acceptable to the communities that are affected and allows the business to, so because they're not anti-development, they just don't want their water poisoned so they can't fish and feed themselves, So I'm afraid you do come across good examples of states when they take action, but then of course everyone wants to dump on their enemies and go easy on their friends.
I mean, again, I think that's an amazing sort of area for looking at human rights defenders. And I think I especially welcome the idea of due diligence, because that brings it into the actual business model, right? As opposed to corporate social responsibility of a voluntary sort, where they decide how much of their brand is going to be affected if they do X or Y. So to bring it into the process of setting up a business development seems very, very powerful. I mean, I know that environmental and very often in a related story, Indigenous defenders are very often the most targeted. Do you think there's a particularly maybe hopeful or positive aspect to those particular campaigns, even if they face some of the worst violations?
Yeah, 70% of all those killed every year, which are over 400, are Indigenous land or Indigenous land or environmental human rights defenders. But because it's the 25th anniversary, I am actually bringing 11 children and their guardians and 30 young people under 32, which is the UN definition of being young, to Vienna to mark the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration, which was, of course, seminal in setting up the human rights machinery. And the youngest child coming is an Indigenous defender from Ecuador, and she's only 10. But to me, and she's on their youth council, and that's to me very hopeful, because these are the people who are going to carry the human rights movement forward into the future, and long after I'm in the ground. And I think it's really important to ensure that you try and nurture children who are acting now so much in terms of climate and environment. And young people who tell me they're not taken seriously, their voices aren't heard, nobody takes them seriously. Their parents sometimes are threatened because of their work. Their parents are told to, more or less make them stop what they're doing. But, if you look at the human rights movement, I started in the 70s, and it was an awful place then. You had the military dictatorships in Latin America, you had apartheid, you had the Soviet Union, you had all these awful situations. But at the same time, you had the continuous growth and development of more and more people working in human rights. There's now considered to be 10 million NGOs around the world working in human rights. And they all work on whatever issue there is. They try and find allies in states and in national institutions, or wherever they think there might be a combination and obviously international organizations and the EU and the UN and all that, wherever they think they might be able to advance whatever right it is that they're working on, they try and find allies to strengthen what they are saying. And that, of course, is where credibility, visibility, and recognition comes in as well.
I thought that was actually a very compelling part of your discussion of allyship, which is that you had a lot of cases all the way from very local cases up to international allies and international cases, but even very local cases where a government actor, like a district commissioner or something like that, would work with defenders.
Yeah, that case, it was the children in Bangladesh who were working against forced marriage, and they had prevented 13 child marriages, but they worked in a collaboration with the district commissioner, and as I said, they prevented 13 child marriages, and they are at risk themselves for this work.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, yeah.
That was a very compelling story. I also think it's interesting that beyond, these officials, say, or other state parties or state agents getting involved as allies suggests that the language of human rights, or the idea of human rights defenders, or maybe not even if it's formally expressed in terms of commitments of the state to international conventions and things like that, nevertheless must resonate with these state actors for them to do anything, right? Well, maybe it's their morality.
I think, you'll always find good people. in all walks of life. You just have to identify them. And like one of the other cases that I think is so powerful is in Yemen with the abductee mothers, who were seen in the local community in very hostile reaction to their work. But bit by bit, they run over the local community when they were working on the people who had been abducted and disappeared. And they have managed, to with both sides of the conflict, to be allowed to do their work and have found people. So, I mean, I think that's really extraordinary in a conflict and a situation like Yemen. So, yeah.
No, I mean, again, Yemen is a great example of you finding success in, some very, very, very difficult circumstances. Do all of the defenders you find who found success even in a place as tough as Yemen, do they have something in common in their approach, or is there a reason why they succeed?
Yeah, well, I think everyone is fueled by hope. I don't think anyone can continue to be resilient and to persist and to resist injustice unless they can find hope. And even today, I was at the award for human rights defenders here in Dublin, and two of the people who won awards, they both mentioned hope. And it's like the fuel that allows human rights defenders to think something will be better and something has to be better. And it also, I think, it's that whole, it's a bit like Seamus Heaney's line, walk on air against your better judgment. And there's another poem I used to like, and I was looking for it lately, couldn't find it because I thought it kind of summed up human rights defenders, and it said, with madness and a bit of hope. And I think with a lot of human rights defenders, that is because they're taking on huge challenges, either in women's rights or LGBT rights, or like, I've had amazing meetings. There was one in the Amazon where, it was just a tarpaulin poles covered by a tarpaulin with a few people inside and a couple of goats running around and a baby crawling, and they had never spoken to anyone before. And and then we were able to connect them with a load of organizations and that. And one of them said, "This is great, this internet." He said, and now it was going in and out. "This is great, this internet. I'm going to be able to learn lots of things now by going to meetings." And then there was another one with women, beautiful Maasai women, the most exquisite outfits in a valley in Kenya. Who were talking about the patriarchy and the fact that even their own community was so guilty of gender, and they were working against gender-based violence. So, I mean, when you see this kind of thing where people will continue and they are dogged, it's almost something of the spirit, I think, that they are willing to take risks, not for their own personal advancement, but for the rights of others. And usually when you talk to them, it's trying to make the world a bit better for their children.
I mean, I have so many questions about that. I guess maybe I'll start with the last comment about the spirit. Do you find that some form of spirituality animates a lot of these struggles? And I'm not putting any kind of particular religious gloss on it.
No, I think when I suppose I talk of the spirit as a loose kind of, it's just the sense of injustice is so strong in them that they just have to, work against it when they see it happening and feel that there is something they can do. Of course, there are different human rights defenders of many different religions, and some of them are faith based. They do it out of their faith, but I think the commonality between them all is this thirst for justice and this thirst to seek redress for wrongs being visited on their communities.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to reduce it to an emotion or anything like
Yeah.
that. It's more of a sort of a way of being. It
Yeah,
seems
I
like.
mean, they get up in the morning and they sometimes don't even know if they're coming home that night. And but they make their human rights work part of who they are and what they are. You know, it's in their blood, it's in their breathing, and it's just what they do.
Yeah, and you've said that it's very often women human rights defenders or LGBT human rights defenders who are the most successful or have the strongest analysis of their situation coming out of that. Is that part of it, or why do you think they're so particularly successful?
Well, I think it's very hard to generalize, and I wouldn't generalize in any way, because with women human rights defenders and LGBT human rights defenders, they are targeted not only for what they do, but who they are. And for every advance that women human rights defenders have made for women's rights in so many countries, there are tons of countries. We just need to look at Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, you know, that abuse human rights or women's rights. LGBT rights, they've just brought in this awful bill, or in the process of it, in Uganda, but at the same time, Botswana, Belize have you know, they've decriminalized homosexuality. So, I mean, I suppose it's always, I always think countries go up and down, and it's a constant, and human rights abuses are going to be always with us, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and that is kind of a form of success. You talk about many forms of success in the report, you know, access to justice, protecting the vulnerable, holding businesses accountable, securing the release of unjustly detained prisoners. But one is success through survival. And it sounds like you're talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, for the year before the Taliban took over, we talked to hundreds of human rights defenders in Afghanistan, because the situation was deteriorating, and we were trying to alert the international community to bringing their voices, not on my voice, but that's what I see as my job. You know, the added value I can give is to try and bring the voices of those who don't have the access to states that I do to them. So we had a lot of meetings and that, and then of course the Taliban took over, and it has just, for women human rights defenders, the stories we were hearing from them about what was being visited down on them. But you know, we managed to get 155 of the people that we had talked to, you know, temporary visas, they're not temporary, but visas outside. But there are still people in Afghanistan working, you know, and we're trying to support them. And in Iran, I mean, you know, there was a demonstration there was a demonstration in Afghanistan yesterday for women's rights. You know, I mean, you just think of it, you know, there about 10 women walking along together with little placards, and you just say, you know, are they totally, what is it that's driving this? You know, they know what the consequences could be. And the same in Iran. There were so many young people in Iran who have suffered so much, and so many have been even executed for participating in demonstrations. And you look at the 6 organizations in OPT in West Bank who have been, and Gaza, that have been designated terrorists by the Israelis. They're no more terrorists than I am. And the EU did, because of the designation by the Israelis, the EU stopped its funding to do an investigation. Now, they found, of course, that they weren't terrorists, so they resumed the funding. But they are still going into work every day, despite the fact that they have been raided, the place has been closed up. They're still under the designation of terrorists. And you know, they are just, you know, unshakable.
Well, your talk about the EU makes me think that what you know, those of us in the EU can do. But even more broadly, when you said that sort of hope is the fuel, I suspect solidarity is the engine, if I'm going to push this metaphor as far as possible. I mean, and so what do you think, you know, the role of solidarity is, and how can individuals like us or like our listeners help human rights defenders succeed?
Well, solidarity is huge. I remember donkeys years ago when I was director of amnesty, going up into a place somewhere and seeing this poster on the wall, and it said solidarity is the last weapon of the defenseless. And it stayed with me. And solidarity is so important because it allows people to feel they are not alone, and that there are people that care about what they're doing and can try and assist them. So for anyone who is interested in helping protect human rights defenders, they should lobby their governments to make human rights defenders a priority for their country. What countries need to do, they need laws, policies, and implementation. That's all. And it's not rocket science, it's easy. But it won't happen unless there is a groundswell in the country. And oftentimes society is also against the work of human rights defenders because they're fed false narratives. There's no free press, all of that kind of stuff. So it's very important for anybody who actually knows a little bit about human rights and believes in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that's 75 years old this year. And for me, human rights defenders, they're the ones that breathe life into the declaration. So for what I think the best thing that anyone can do is try and shape society a bit, talk to, I always say, when I used to talk to schools and things, I'd say, this is your community. The school is your community. Talk to the school, talk to all the people in the school. Don't think you have to solve what's happening over there. Start with, trying to create a rights-based approach, wherever you are. And that includes, when you hear all these stupid and offensive stories about refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, that you don't sit on the fence, and that you recognize that, states have to apply, you say that you insist that states apply the international standards to which they themselves have agreed. And the right to asylum is one of them. I don't know if you saw the piece in the New York Times where the documentation of refugees, asylum seekers, and babies and children was videoed right from the time they were taken into a van, then put into a boat, a speedboat, then taken to the Hellenic Coast Guard, then put on a raft and pushed back to Turkey. Now, I did a country report on Greece last year, and the criminalization of human rights defenders who are working to defend the rights of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers is desperate. They're all being criminalized. Lawyers aren't allowed in to see their clients. Anyone involved in search and rescue is seen as a people smuggler. Médecins Sans Frontières are forbidden to go to landing sites to give medical attention to people, and all the time. And when I spoke to the Hellenic Coast Guard, they actually said to me their policy was control, and what was the other word? Well, it was all about control, and the way they phrased it anyway, they thought it was a good thing that they were saying, but they were really playing into my hands, because the approach was all about get rid of all these people and just push them back into Turkey. And we see it in Italy as well, and we see it UK now as well. It's just everywhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is such a challenging sort of site for showing solidarity, but of course, it's all that more important to show solidarity to these defenders.
Exactly, and I think it is, but even there's hope there too, because we had 2 defenders in Libya who were in the detention centers. They're terrible places with ongoing torture and desperate conditions. but they started working for the rights of the people as asylum seekers themselves. They started working for the rights of the people and got some advances. It is really mind-blowing.
So there's hope everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, for being with us and for breathing life into human rights for all of us. And thank you also for showing us that human rights really do work.
Thank you very much for having me.